Hello, you're very welcome along to the Matchbook NFL Week 14 podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Hussey, joined by the trio of Rob Pizzola, Fabian Sommer, and Drew Dinsick. Things are heating up in the NFL big time. We've got playoffs coming up. Drew, I'll hand over straight over to you for Week 13 takeaways. There's a lot of quarterbacks getting injured for teams that are going to try to win the Super Bowl here. So for you, that's obviously going to disrupt a lot of markets and very hard to price, given that we have a small sample size of some of these quarterbacks.
Yeah, it's always a fun exercise to go through what is the correct downgrade for a given offense going from starter to backup quarterback. It's something that you have to kind of be prepared to do all season long. It's rare that it happens this late in the season, and it's even more rare that it happens with teams who are like in the driver's seat for kind of premier playoff position. So specifically Jimmy Garoppolo and Lamar Jackson going down this week, and just trying to see how even beyond just the week 14 games, just seeing how that has sort of butterfly affected into the futures market, or really not quite reflected enough, in my opinion, has been pretty interesting exercise this week. So I definitely, I think both injuries are very meaningful. And I think expecting that either of those teams kind of bounces back and has, is able to replace the level of performance they've gotten from those quarterbacks in the short term. And in the case of San Francisco, the long term is very much in question in my mind.
Yeah, Sue, and another playoff team that you got a quarterback firing at the moment, Jalen Hurts, the Eagles, and you're kind of looking at their path potentially all the way to Super Bowl, and it's getting easier and easier.
Yeah, I took the Eagles to win the Super Bowl right after they traded for Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, and gotta be honest, after the Jimmy Garoppolo injury, I feel a little bit more better about the ticket, because I thought that the Eagles would have a tough matchup against the Niners, because the Niners can play up to the Eagles' weaknesses on defense, like pounding the ball with Christian McCaffrey attacking the middle of the field, and the Eagles and the Niners also have a decent run defense. Now without Jimmy Garoppolo, I feel a little bit better if Brock Purdy is the quarterback in the playoffs, if they even get so far to play the Eagles at all. And I also thought that the Eagles would have kind of a decent matchup against the Cowboys, because the Cowboys have a not so great run defense, and they are now down 2 starting cornerbacks. So, yeah, I like that path for the Eagles a little bit more now.
Yeah, they definitely seem a team that you can suddenly start seeing winning a Super Bowl. Maybe that wasn't the case a few weeks ago. Rob, for you don't want to maybe completely dismiss teams that perhaps have been playing an easier schedule.
Yeah, I think we see this happen a lot in the NFL, where people just get fixated on they've played an easy schedule or they've played a hard schedule, and they don't look at actually how a team has performed versus that easy schedule. So the perfect example is the Cincinnati Bengals, right? I've been preaching the Bengals now for several weeks. I publish my own NFL power rankings for the Hammer, and I always get like responses of like, you have the Bengals way too high. They've played nobody. It's like, okay, they've played nobody, but they've beaten down some of these teams. It's not like they're just pulling out, close games against nobodies. Like, think back to that game against Carolina that was over at halftime. It's not like that was a game where, it went down to the wire. So they finally beaten somebody now in the Kansas City Chiefs. But I think that's just like, a takeaway for me in general, whether it's a hard schedule, an easy schedule, look at how they've actually fared against those opponents, rather than just saying, oh, they've played an easy schedule, they've played a hard schedule. Like, you can apply some context based off the opponents that they've played.
Okay, yeah. One comment before we get through to the 4 games. I've heard you speak about this, Drew, in terms of the 49ers and what happens if they end up being trash, and Seattle could potentially sneak in and win the division. Pricing up, I think it's around 3 or 4s for Seattle to win the division, which it can be looked upon as quite high.
Yeah, and I think the Niners only have 8 wins. So if Brock Purdy stinks, they might not make the playoffs. I think it's going to take 10 wins probably to get in the NFC. Maybe 9-8 gets in, but you're going to need tie-break luck. And so they don't have a plan B. Josh Johnson is apparently what you're going to if Brock Purdy's not ready. And yeah, I think San Francisco is definitely a team that I'm looking to go against this week. We're going to get there. And they're a team that I think, doesn't match up well right on a quick turnaround Thursday against the Seahawks. So if you feel like there is a meaningful chance that Brock Purdy's not the guy, I think you attack Niners not to make the playoffs, really. You can get some big prices there, and I don't think that reflects the realistic possibility that Brock Purdy is actually a 7th-round draft pick who's making his first career start.
Yeah, and it's going to be fascinating, that Bucs game. We're not going to be covering it, but the total alone shows you how tense I think that game's going to be. And obviously, Tom Brady's stunning last 3 minutes, despite the previous 57 minutes and on that game. It's that's set up brilliantly. So I did make a push to have that in the top 4, but the guys have kind of lent it alone. And we're going to cover 4 games: Browns at Bengals, Vikings at Lions, Dolphins at Chargers, and Eagles at Giants. Some pretty decent matchups here. Before we get going, if you are watching on the live stream, do get involved in the live chat. If you're watching back the live stream, do get involved in the comment section. Leave a comment on your best bet. Have a comment on the guys' picks, and hit that like button as well. That'd be much appreciated. Just gets our content out to a wider audience. We'll start with the Browns at the Bengals and take a look at the betting as we have it at matchbook.com. You can currently back the Browns on the money line at 3.05, Bengals 1.43. The Browns are getting a 5.5 start, and the total is 47. Rob, you touched on the Bengals, and I think people maybe are starting to take notice all of a sudden because they've become this great team overnight by beating the Chiefs. So do you potentially think there's been a slight market overreaction in pricing them up here, and maybe you're kind of leaning towards the Browns at maybe 5.5, 6?
I am. 6 is the different number than 5.5, obviously, and creates more value. But regardless, I like the Browns in this game. And we look at the Bengals, sort of what I was talking about earlier. If since week 3, the Bengals have failed to cover the spread just one time. That was actually the game against the Browns on Halloween. But that's kind of flown under the radar because, again, people dismiss it, easy schedule, so on and so forth. But now I think we've seen finally the adjustment that's been coming on the Bengals. And I think they go from underrated or undervalued to overvalued because they beat the Kansas City Chiefs. One thing they've done really well this year is protect Joe Burrow. He has the 3rd lowest pressure rate in the entire league. He gets pressured on just 26% of his dropbacks. This has been a problem for the Cincinnati Bengals going back years now against the Cleveland Browns, is the amount of pressure that the Browns put on this Bengals O-line and the sack rate. And you can say the O-line was different in previous years. Well, the O-line was the same this year. And go back to that Halloween game, 5 sacks, the Cleveland Browns there. Joe Burrow did not have a lot of time in the pocket. So ultimately, you're now asking the Bengals to cover a big number. And then on the other side of things, okay, Deshaun Watson didn't look good last week. In fact, he looked pretty bad. It was his first game back off 2 years, rust. I highly doubt he's going to continue to perform at the level of last week's game going forwards. And that's sort of where we're starting to price him now. Like people are like, oh, is Deshaun Watson going to be okay or whatever? Really, Deshaun Watson just needs to be an average quarterback. And I think you can justify a bet on the Cleveland Browns in this spot. Like, what would the number be with Jacoby Brissett? It's probably short of 5.5, honestly. And there's a very likely chance that Watson is an upgrade. So personally, I can't get to this number. It's very difficult to value Deshaun Watson going forwards, but we probably caught his absolute worst performance that we're going to get against a team where, frankly, they probably didn't need to do a lot of stuff offensively. Like, it was a very vanilla game plan. Now you'll see more bells and whistles this week, probably more RPO. They can lean on the running game, and they always have been able to lean on the running game whenever they've faced the Bengals in the past as well. So I think it's a big number. I made it closer to 4 in this spot. I like the Cleveland Browns here.
Yeah, and look, they did get the job done in the end. And Drew, do you agree on those comments on Deshaun Watson in particular, that if he's just an average quarterback this week, they can stay in this game against the Bengals?
Yeah, I mean, Rob is cooking. Those were all great. Those were all great points. I completely, and it was funny, is you have to be able to have 2 thoughts in your head at the same time doing this. The result of last week's Bengals Chiefs game tells you something valuable, which is that the Bengals deserve to be in the conversation as they can go into a Buffalo and win in the playoffs. They can go into Kansas City and win the playoffs. Like, they are absolutely now in the conversation to win the AFC. You have to come out of that game thinking that, right? You can point to their defense playing better with DJ Reader, and particularly the run stop. You can point to their offensive line finding some cohesion and giving Burrow more time. You can point to them coming up with new wrinkles in their offense in the absence of Jamar Chase, and now he's back and they're even more dynamic. Like, those are all real things to take away from the last handful of weeks about the Bengals. The look-ahead adjustment from 3 to 6.5 off the open was bananas, because no team should get that kind of a bump in any given week. If you want to say some of that was people cooling their jets a little on what Deshaun Watson would be as far as an upgrade, that's probably true to some. It was a little bit of both 2 sides moving in that one. But I'm like more at 4.5 here. I didn't get involved at 6.5 because I was hoping it would get kind of a flat 6.5. Never did. Somebody hit hit this one hard, down to 5.5. I would think it was probably trends to 5. So at this point, I'm trying to look for other angles to bet this game. I mean, I noticed that just in general, Browns defense has been playing better. Pass defense in particular. Their run defense, though, still stinks. And I think there's a decent chance that Bengals coming in off of a motivational high spot, big win, and Zach Taylor now getting Joe Mixon off of concussion protocol, going against a team that can't really stop the run. He may tack into some of his worst tendencies, which Zach Taylor definitely still has in the back of his playbook, as far as I can tell you. So they may kind of be their own worst enemy here offensively in this game. And then on the flip side, I do like the Bengals defense being a lot more capable of stopping the Browns in this game than they were on Halloween, just based on personnel available. The Bengals pass defense is still a little suspect outside of their outstanding safety play, but you have a Browns team that just has Amari Cooper and a bunch of guys who are out there getting, who can't create separation. So I don't think, even if Watson is really, is back to kind of what we would expect from him, I still don't know that he has enough to work with to really hurt the Bengals in this one. So I'm looking for like a live under potentially. I think the total is a little high as it is, but these are two coaches that I think that, in enough familiarity that they could cook up pretty decent game scripts here. You could see pretty high efficiency on the opening drives, at which point you may be able to get involved with the live under in like the 51 range if we see some early success offensively. But my fair total is a little under the current number, hanging around to 47.5. So if I had to make a play at this point, it would be under.
Okay, Sum, I know you're neutral on this, but your thoughts on the game and how it's going to set up.
I think that Kevin Stefanski will watch the Chiefs tape from last week and knows that Nick Chubb is probably going to have a very big game, because the Chiefs ran the ball very well on that Bengals front. Jerick McKinnon and Isaiah Pacheco, I think they averaged 0.24 EPA per play overall on rushes, which was an insane number. And I think that the Browns have the strength with their O-line and with Nick Chubb to do the same and punish them on the ground. And I also think that Deshaun Watson will have a much better game this week. It's hard to put everything on Rust, but this performance last week was so bad that it can only go up. And I think that the truth and the median projection for Deshaun Watson probably lies somewhere between Jacoby Brissett and Deshaun Watson's prior. We cannot expect Deshaun Watson to perform up to the level that he last showed with the Texans, which was his best season in the NFL. But we should probably expect that long term he will perform closer to his career-long prior, and also a little bit better than Jacoby Brissett. So I can also see the Browns offense having a much better game this week. But I'm also thinking that even without Hayden Hurst, the Bengals should be able to run the ball on that poor Browns run defense, and they should also have some success throwing the ball. I'm a little bit higher on the Bengals. With David Njoku in, I'm around 5.5 for this game, so completely neutral. I can make a case for both offenses to have success, so I would probably lean slightly towards the over. But overall, this is going to be a very fascinating game to watch, in my opinion, because we all want to see whether that was a one-time fluke with Deshaun Watson, or maybe there are some deeper issues. But I would expect a much better performance from the Browns offense this week.
Okay, I think we'll lock in a small bet on the Browns plus 5.5 and put our eggs in the Deshaun Watson isn't as bad as last week basket, and we'll lock that in as official bet on Matchbook. We'll move on to the second game, which is Vikings at Lions, and take a look at the betting as we have it on Matchbook.com. You can currently back the Vikings as the underdogs, 2.1 on the money line. Detroit Lions are 1.84. The Vikings are getting a 1.5 star, and 51 is the total. Suma, handing over to you. I've heard the Vikings being described this week as the worst ever 10-2 NFL team. Is that fair? You're sorry, just nodding in agreement there. So go on, make the case for why they are.
I mean, you cannot make a case. You cannot make a case against that statement, in my opinion.
Okay.
I mean, not only do they have, I think, the worst point differential for a 10-2 team like ever.
Yeah.
Also, when we look at some common or at the most popular efficiency metrics like DVOA or EPA per play, also schedule adjusted. It's very interesting. Let's just ignore both records for 1 second, okay? DVOA ranking overall, Minnesota Vikings 20th, Detroit Lions 13th. EPA per play, schedule adjusted, Minnesota Vikings 18th, Lions 10th. Like, if both teams get a little bit more lucky or unlucky in close games, also like the first game that these two teams played, where the Lions were up, I think, by 7 or 10 points going into the fourth quarter, when just a few bounces go differently, we could be looking at the Lions having a better record than the Vikings right now. At least the underlying efficiency metrics would make a case for this. What I also like about that matchup for the Lions and why I think they should be favored here is that there are some interesting stats for both, or season-long trends for both quarterbacks when it comes to man versus zone coverage. Kirk Cousins, and those numbers are from Sports Info Solutions and from True Media. Kirk Cousins in EPA per play against man coverage ranks 29th out of 35 qualifying quarterbacks this year. Kirk Cousins against blitz, which is also a theme that goes throughout the whole season. Kirk Cousins in EPA per play against blitz, 25th out of 35 qualifying quarterbacks. Guess what? The Lions defense, 5th highest blitz rate and 5th highest man coverage rate. The Lions also did a very good job defending Justin Jefferson in the first game, where he only had 14 yards for whatever reason against this Lions defense. They put Jeff Okudah on him a lot in man coverage, tried to use some bracket coverage with a safety over the top, and it worked out very well. Kirk Cousins struggled basically for 3 quarters. And on the other side, the Vikings are one of the most zone heaviest defenses in the league. They call zone coverage at the 5th highest rate. And Jared Goff is one of the best quarterbacks in EPA per play against zone, ranking 5th out of 35 qualifying quarterbacks. So we have a matchup between two teams where the Lions right now are even performing at a better clip than the Vikings when we look at season-long metrics. And we also have a very interesting matchup from the perspective of each quarterback against the opposing defense. It makes only sense, in my opinion, that the Lions are favored by 2 right now. And I would also still lean towards the Lions at this number.
Yeah, Rob, you're in full agreement there. I saw you nodding there.
Yeah, so I have obviously had some challenges with the Vikings this year.
Yeah. Tell us about the tweet, your tweet, going on Sunday night.
I've lost more on them than any other team. I said, I think find me someone or find yourself someone who loves you as much as I love losing money betting against the Vikings. Yes, that's been the case for me for a while. But I am a process-driven person, right? I'm not a results-based analyst. So when I lose bets, I tend to go back afterwards and I tend to review the bet and say, did I make a good bet here? Both in terms of did it beat the closing line and what should the score have been in this game, or like what was the most likely outcome in this game based off of the box score stats. And I continuously find myself doing the same thing with Minnesota every week, which is I did make a good bet. The market agreed with me. And on top of that, they probably shouldn't have won or covered this game. And eventually, I do think that catches up to a team. I mean, the reality is if you flip a coin 10 times, you're going to land on heads 10 times in a row, a certain percentage of the time. And right now the Vikings are benefiting from, in my opinion, just some variance working in their favor. But not only am I down on the Vikings, I am, for all the reasons Suma mentioned, by the way, I'm also very high on the Lions right now. And I wasn't a believer in them, going into the year. I'm dying over here, guys. 1 second.
Do you need a minute? Yeah. No, take your time.
I'm good. I'm good. This is what happens when you skip lunch. You're having pistachios during the show, like a complete disaster. The Lions. Amon-Ra St. Brown completely changes the offense for them. DeAndre Swift completely changes the offense for them. all the injuries they had on the defensive line earlier in the year completely changes the defense for them. This is now a healthy team. We're seeing that when they are at full health, they are a much better team than they were at the midpoint of this year where they had a bunch of injuries. Think back to Minnesota, Detroit, the first time they played. The Lions dominated that game for 3/4 of the game. St. Brown and Swift get hurt, and then they can't move the ball anymore, and the Vikings come back from 10 behind in the fourth quarter to win that game. Looking at this year, Jared Goff with St. Brown on the field, 0.20 EPA per dropback. That would rank 4th in the league amongst all qualified quarterbacks. When St. Brown is off the field this year, he would rank 30th out of all qualified quarterbacks. It really changes the offense altogether, having the full complement of weapons. On top of that, the Lions O-line is one of the best in the league. They do a great job of protecting him, and the Vikings defense cannot generate pressure. And in this particular game, that hurts them because they do not have enough corners to cover the Lions receivers. So take away the records, exactly like Suma said, right? Like, forget that one team has 10 wins and one team has 4 wins. Imagine you just put their profiles up side by side, their rosters up side by side, and what they've accomplished this season from a stats perspective. You'd be hard pressed to find a difference between the two teams. On top of that, you might say the Lions are even better right now. So I like Detroit in this game. I think the number is short. A lot of people will scratch their heads and be like, "Oh, is this like there's Vegas setting the trap type of situation?" But no, it's just we're in common sense mode right now. So I will be there again. TJ Hawkinson revenge angle. That's a good one as well. Oh man. But yeah, I'm betting against the Vikings again this week.
Yeah, for those of us on the podcast, Suma was laughing at a comment saying, "What about the killing, or the Vikings are killing Bobby Pizza?" That was the comment. So Suma couldn't contain himself. Drew, look, the Lions have been great, winning 4 of the last 5. I think that defeat to the Bills. It's important, I guess, because the Vikings are 10-2. They're there to be shot at. If they were 6-6, we'd probably be, the narrative would be a little bit different, saying they're going okay. But I guess because they're 10-2, people are entitled to go be against them at the current market prices.
Yeah, I mean, this is a trap. I don't know what else to say. I can't believe that these experienced sports bettors are falling into this very obvious trap. Yeah. The margins between these teams, the matchups between these teams, everything you want to kind of point to, and for me at least, says dead even. If you want to give the Vikings a little bit of a downgrade just on the basis of some of the points Rob made about their inability to generate pressure, and in general, some of the question marks I have about their secondary and ability to cover, I think that's realistically fair. Lions right now are riding one of the hottest passing offenses in the NFL, which is amazing to say. I did the triple take when I looked this up because I was just curious. You kind of evaluate teams over certain portions of the season just to get a sense of where they are, how they're trending. If you go back and look at the last 6 weeks, week 8 to 13, Lions are the best passing offense in the NFL. They're better than the Cowboys. They're better than the Dolphins. They're better than the Chiefs. And that seems crazy to say out loud. And yes, the margin is very narrow. They're 1/1000th EPA per play per dropback better than the Dolphins and the Cowboys. So it's very, very, very close. But that doesn't change the fact that puts them in elite company when it comes to pass attack. And I think that's going to be very impactful in this game because you're going to put the Vikings in a negative game state where they then have to pivot away from utilizing Cook. This becomes a pass only game. You have a healthy Okudah who matches up decently well against Justin Jefferson. I think you kind of can evaluate from the last game between these two teams. I thought Detroit was the right side. I thought Detroit probably should have won and covered. It was some weird decision making by the Lions and Dan Campbell in particular at the end of that game that really kept the Vikings in it. And I think, this is an opportunity to kind of correct some of those mistakes. They're at home. You're in a dome. I really only worry about Jared Goff when he's, kind of in the elements and or he's under duress. And I don't think either of those things are going to be a factor in this game. So Lions, I do think, continue their winning ways. But at the current market price, not enough of an edge for me to bet this one. I do think the over also has a little bit of an edge. So for me, at least, looking at Lions team total might be the answer.
Okay, yeah, we got a couple of comments in about the Lions team total. For us, I think we'll just lock in the Lions -1.5. Rob and Suma have convinced me 1.93. We're gonna keep betting against the Vikings until we win, basically.
We're gonna martingale against the Vikings, baby. Let's go.
I still have that tweet, Rob. When I saw that, it was just my thought process. Why am I backing against the Vikings? And you tweeted it. I was like, yeah. We'll move on to the Dolphins at my beloved Chargers and take a look at the betting as we have at Matchbook.com. Dolphins are the favorites in LA at 1.59. Chargers are 2.56. The Chargers are getting a 3.5 head start at 1.88, and the total is 51.5. I assume that the Chargers bubble has definitely been burst, and if it wasn't before last week, it most certainly is now. I guess at this stage, like they're very, very outside chance of playoffs, I guess, maybe at this point. But going into this game, it's obviously must win if they do want to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. I would personally like to get Justin Herbert into the playoffs because I think it would be more entertaining as watching Mac Jones, for example, and that Matt Patricia offense, to be honest. But yeah, it is like it is. The Chargers had two problems, in my opinion, this season. First of all, Joe Lombardi's offense. There were some breakdowns from the guys from Pro Football Focus and I think Nate Tice this week. Like, this Chargers offense really reminds me of the Jason Garrett offense that the Giants ran when he was their OC. Like, everything is just
That he ran.
Yeah, ran. Fair. Like, 3rd and 4, 5 receivers are running isolated routes. There are no route combinations. There are no pick plays. There's almost like nothing that really helps guys like Josh Palmer get open. It's basically Josh Palmer, go out, Keenan Allen, win your man coverage matchup, and then Justin, you have to make a perfect play on 3rd down. That's basically their offense. Secondly, they were derailed by injuries. Mike Williams and Keenan Allen have played 27 passing snaps together this year, which is completely bananas, but it is like it is. Corey Linsley was out the past 2 games, I guess. Trey Pipkins, right tackle, dealing with an injury. Rashawn Slater has been out for almost the whole year. So they had some injuries, and they were still running the same offense as if they did not have those injuries. This week, there's the chance that Mike Williams gets back, that Corey Linsley gets back, Trey Pipkins is day-to-day. So there's a realistic chance that the Chargers offense is almost back to full strength, and they're playing against a Dolphins defense that has a decent defensive line, but their defensive line has barely mattered this season. They have a very bad passing, or let's say way below average passing defense in general, because their secondary cannot cover. Xavier Howard is also not playing his best season, and the rest of those corners are very unproven. So I think there's a path that if the Chargers get those players back, I will also expect a little bit more Chargers money to come into the market. And I also think that there's a path for success for the Chargers offense. But on the other side, I also think that we will see a completely different game from the Dolphins offense this week, because the Chargers defense is not very good. They struggle to get pressure. There will be more open space this week. And first and foremost, I don't expect Tua Tagovailoa to miss 8 wide open receivers this week. I think that there was a lot of talk about the Niners defense playing so well and the pass rush playing so well. But I mean, Tua was only pressured on 27% of his dropbacks, and Mike McDaniel was still able to scheme his receivers open like almost all game long. Even when Jalen Waddle was out, there were still receivers running wide open. And I think this is going to work much better against the Chargers defense. I expect the Dolphins to score. And then with the Chargers getting some guys back, it will depend for me whether I like the over potentially. If we see a little bit more under money, I would probably lean towards the over. If it gets to 51 and the Chargers get a few players back, that might not happen. But that's how I'm seeing the game right now. So if the Chargers get some players back on offense, I think they can make it a competitive game against the Dolphins, a potential high-scoring game. But if they don't get those guys back and they have to play catch-up at some point because the Dolphins offense is going to score, in my opinion, it will be very hard for that offense to come back, in my opinion.
Okay. And Drew, over to you. You kind of like the way this Dolphins offense sets up against the Chargers defense at the moment.
Yeah, I think last week was kind of the perfect mismatch for them, and against them, with the way that the way that the Niners are rostered and their approach to that game really made the Dolphins look bad offensively. And I think almost everything about the way that was done cannot be replicated really by San Francisco. I mean, by the LA Chargers. LA comes in here with one of the most just grossest injury reports that you see across the entire league right now. The only guy that's really outperforming his roles and responsibilities on the entire team that I could tell you is Derwin James, and he did not practice yesterday. He is questionable right now with a quadricep. If he does not go, then this is going to be pretty lopsided in favor of the Dolphins, in my opinion. Bryce Callahan was also limited in practice. And in general, no Sebastian Joseph Day. He was barely helping the rushing defense kind of find some, semblance of acceptability. If Miami can kind of, utilize a balanced attack here in this particular game, I think they're going to find outstanding success offensively. And the other side of the ball, the offensive line here for the Chargers is the worst in football. They're all hurt. And as Suma kind of mentioned, the scheme is egregious. I don't know what the long-term answers are for the Chargers, but they are not in the building now about how to kind of scheme this offense. And I think, with a full week of prep on the West Coast for the Dolphins, I think their defense matches up well. They have enough pass rushers that they can make life difficult here for Justin Herbert. I think this is going to be a pretty lopsided contest. It's taken me a while to get here, but I think laying the points with the Dolphins is the side.
Okay. Yeah, Rob, I think the most frustrating thing for the Chargers is Herbert to Allen, that 35-yard pass on fourth and 12. It shows you what is capable here. But then as Suma touches on, I thought he made some great points that they're trying to run the same offense when Keenan Allen wasn't in the team, and it's just become a bit of a mess, I guess, overall this year.
I would say so. I think Joe Lombardi, Ronaldo Hill, their offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, it's one of the weakest combos in the entire league right now. And I think there's a big coaching mismatch here for the Dolphins. The one thing I will say, there's a couple things I want to touch on here. For one, it's I don't have a strong opinion on this game. I think that there's a lot more upside with Miami right now because of the Chargers injury report, exactly like Drew pointed out. The entire right side of the offensive line is in question for the Chargers this week, which would be a big problem for them. I do hate that this will be billed as Tua versus Herbert, because I think Tua has a lot of inherent advantages in this game with his coaching staff and personnel. And honestly, Justin Herbert, the Chargers have allowed pressure at the 6th highest rate in the league this year, 37.6%. But Justin Herbert takes a sack on just 13% of his dropbacks. That's the 3rd lowest rate amongst all the qualified quarterbacks this year. Herbert has actually played way better than people will give him credit for. Yeah. He's under constant duress. He's not had wide receivers. He's had O-line injuries, has to get the ball out. So I'm kind of hoping that, just from a neutral perspective, that they don't get blown out here and this turns into the Chargers made a mistake with Herbert, because I think that's a bad narrative. One thing I do want to touch on, though, and I'd be interested to hear from Suma and Drew as to whether or not they think this is noise or if they think that there's something to it this year. The Dolphins use play action at the 2nd highest rate in the entire league, 40% of dropbacks. If you split the Chargers defense into non-play action plays and play action plays, when the opponent of the Chargers doesn't use play action, they're 28th in success rate on defense. They give up a successful play 55% of the time. When the opposing team does use play action, they're 8th in defensive success rate. It's very random. The sample size is large on both. I don't know if there's something hidden there or not, but I'm slowly starting to look more and more into these different types of splits across the NFL right now. And that was something that jumped off the page with relation to the Chargers. Maybe that's something. I will say, even if it is, I feel like the Dolphins coaching staff is good enough to know that. and just game plan around it, because I really think highly of their coaching staff regardless. But it was something that I noticed particularly this year. They've been successful against opposing offenses that do run a lot of play action. When other teams just drop the passer back or run the ball a lot, they can't really stop anything in that point.
Okay, any quick thoughts on that, guys? It's been thrown at you.
My guess is that it somehow has to do with Derwin James, just because he's kind of the only guy that matters in that whole defense. And so you may not get an answer this week one way or the other. But those kind of micro trends, though, I do think are meaningful. Like I like, if you have somebody who's top 5 in this and the other team is using that at a top 5 frequency, like that kind of stuff definitely keeps me off of bets at times. So in a vacuum, I would not take that lightly or take it as noise. I would seriously consider it, but I don't know that it's going to matter this week.
Yeah, all angles covered on the Matchbook NFL podcast, as always, by Rob. So we won't lock in a bet there. Very neutral overall. The guys are on the game, although there's probably a lean towards the Dolphins, I guess. But again, injuries could be key in that one. Moving to the final game, which is the Eagles at the Giants, and take a look at the betting as we have it on Matchbook.com. Eagles are currently 1.36 favorites on the money line. Giants 3.4. The Giants getting 6.5 point start, and the total is 44.5. Drew, Jalen Hurts just might be the quarterback that can fire Eagles to a Super Bowl here. I think the momentum's building around him, and maybe even an MVP show, perhaps.
Yeah, I don't want to get any criticism because we didn't really cover all the angles in that Chargers game. They did switch to the powder blues because they're in prime time, and so that's
changes
important.
Everything. Changes it all.
A team that it doesn't really matter what uniforms they wear is going to be the Philadelphia Eagles. This last week's performance was superlative. I thought that was a very clear benchmark game for the Eagles, considering who they were up against and how that team likes to defend. And the Eagles answered every question correctly. They got 100% score for me on that game. That was absolutely perfect. Coaching was excellent. Defense performed its roles and responsibilities well. And Jalen Hurts had his best game of the season and what has been an amazing season from him. All that tends to mean this is a decent opportunity to sell high on a team in general. When you hit that level, it's a little bit of a, okay, well, let's look for an opportunity to sell. Not exactly seeing it with this market and the way it's shaping up here. The general kind of pressure that has come in, keeping this under 7, has kept me from getting involved in this one, because this was one where I was looking for an opportunity to bet the Giants. And the more I kind of break down the injuries and the matchups, it's taken me clearly in the direction of, oh man, Eagles should be able to control the first half of this game pretty comfortably. Their plan A of kind of going back towards a run-heavy approach should be very successful against the Giants the way that they're currently rostered. And if they're successful in the red zone and this is a comfortable lead at halftime, then the Eagles can just absolutely take the air out of the ball in the second half of this game. Divisional matchups and familiarity tend to lean games towards the under anyway, and this is a little bit of an inflated total for a Giants game. Like seeing a 45 next to a Giants game doesn't feel right. Hasn't been exactly a team that can show you much offensively even on a good day, and now they're going up against a well-rostered and a high-level performing defense. So this feels like a pretty lopsided affair here. I do not think the Giants get to 20 points, which would be the only thing that I think would threaten a total of 45. And again, game state in particular, kind of, at least half of the game state being Eagles playing with a lead of at least a score, for most of the second half of this game. I think that lends this to being an underlook.
Okay, yeah, under 45 perhaps for Drew is the bet there. Rob, over to you on this one. We kind of talked on the podcast that the Giants could end up finishing on 7-10. That went out the window with the tie last week, but I guess you can get 7-9-1 maybe. Are you still sort of in that spaces with the Giants at the moment?
I am. I'm struggling with the Giants, and particularly because I did bet on them last week and I did watch a lot of the game, and I thought that they were lucky to have tied that game overall. They got out to a 10-0 lead. Things were working for them early. After that, the offense was just horrible once again, and this has been a consistent theme for them now. You look at weeks 1 to 7 for the Giants, they were 7th in EPA per drive. They were 10th in points per drive. You look at since then, They're 23rd in EPA per drive. They're 24th in points per drive. So opposing teams have started to figure them out. They've run a ton of play action this year as well. They were highly effective running play action early in the year, and that's just not working for them anymore because teams don't respect the passing game all that much. So I just don't trust the Giants to be able to score on this Eagles defense consistently. We did see the Eagles defense perform admirably in the run game with Jordan Davis back last week against the Titans. So it's not like the Giants, I think, can come out and just like shorten the game and keep the chains moving on the ground either. My number in the game, the number I make it is 7. But with that said, I have bet the Giants or had leaned to the Giants the last couple of weeks. So I might be a little bit, overvaluing them relative to market. And just from a subjective perspective, as like a neutral, someone who's not going to bet this game, I feel like my number might be a little bit off there. I think the Eagles have a lot of matchups that they can take advantage of in this game on both sides of the ball. And really, like, where do the Giants have an edge in this game from a personnel standpoint? Like, just line up their personnel groupings with the Eagles across the board, and where the Giants have the edge at running back, who cares? Like, across the board, the Eagles are better than them. So now, granted, that's built into the price, 7-point favorite on the road, but it's Eagles or nothing for me. Most likely nothing in this game unless we move off the 7.
Okay, yeah, Sim, at the moment, the line on Matchbook is just hanging on to 6.5. It's currently 1.9, and you would make that a bet.
Yes, I would certainly look towards the Eagles at -6.5. I also make it 7 right now, and I also cannot find a valid argument to just bet the Giants here. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Eagles, I think that in most recent weeks, I cannot be impressed more with any other coaching staff, in my opinion. Like, they had a great rushing matchup against the Packers. They ran for almost 400 yards against them. Last week, they played a very good Titans run defense. A Titans defense with some weaknesses at outside cornerback, especially against deep passes. And what did the Eagles do? They tried not to run it too much, and they just threw the ball all over the field and just shredded them through the air. Like, this is phenomenal textbook coaching, in my opinion. Just try to attack the opposing weaknesses. And what's even more impressive is that the Eagles cannot only attack opposing weaknesses, they also have various strength to attack like almost any weakness that a opposing defense could have right now. The Giants defense, Rick Martindale, he does the same thing over and over again. Heavy man coverage, I think top 5 man coverage rate, second highest blitz rate, or even highest blitz rate in the league right now. Jalen Hurts, 5th highest EPA per play against man coverage this year. And even against the blitz, he got much better in recent weeks. Since week 7, second half of the season, he has a positive EPA per play number against man coverage, which ranks, I think, 14th out of 30 qualifying quarterbacks or something. So Hurts is getting better, and I don't think that the Giants have the quality in their secondary and in their pass rush to really play the Eagles offense tightly. I think the Eagles will score. And then on the other side, I don't have too much hope for Daniel Jones to consistently throw on that Eagles defense with 2 good cornerbacks, with that pass rush. It's just hard to find a good valid point to make for the Giants here.
Yeah, I'm quite like the case, to be honest, for Eagles -6.5 under that 7. So we're going to lock that in 1.9 with Suma's recommendation there. So quick recap of what we have so far: Browns +5.5, 1.94. Lions -1.5, 1.93, and Eagles -6.5, 1.9. The guys have other sort of bets and leans, but they're the 3 we've locked in. Insights.matchbook.com. If you want a full recap, that'll be available Friday morning. Especially maybe head of red zone if you're looking for a reminder of the guys' tips. That will all be there. Drew, I'm very interested in your any other bets. For some reason, do you know when you look at your futures market and where you are? Like, I'm heavily invested in the books from a couple of months ago, and I've written off many of those bets and just said I'll take the L on the Super Bowl market this year. But look, the books, when Tom Brady did that in the last few, I couldn't believe it. Like, because considering how terrible the books were, as I mentioned earlier, for 57 minutes, Brady got it done again. Like, hey,
yeah. Oh no, I never lost faith. No, I never quit on these guys. And honestly, like that's kind of tongue in cheek, but it's also somewhat true because the NFC South never ran away from them, right? Like the case for kind of losing any kind of hope that the Bucs were going to find any form was that it was going to be too little, too late, and the even a wild card spot might have been out of reach because the likes of the Giants were compiling wins, and here come the Commanders, and that they're going to need 10 wins, and there's just not enough games left, right? Like that was kind of the reality they were facing for a lot of this season, if there was any challenger that emerged in the NFC South, but there was not. And it turned out last week's kind of 2-minute drill for Brady was that was season saving, really, because you keep the Saints now from really thinking they have a shot. You keep the I don't know that they had a direct influence on the Falcons making a decision to move from Mariota to Ritter, but surely I think personally that the idea that Ritter all of a sudden puts them into a mix is nonsense. They are now kind of evaluating next season in the future, and a lot of that is because you got that win. So huge high leverage drives there for Brady at the end of that game, and that can definitely carry into this one. But much more the handicap of why I played Bucs money line this week is because I do not understand why we are treating Brock Purdy like he is going to be Jimmy G in Halloween costume. It's tough for me to kind of dissect, and it's tough for everyone to dissect Jimmy G's performance over the years from Kyle Shanahan's system. Kyle Shanahan's system is awesome. In general, quarterbacks have in single game samples or over multiple game samples have overperformed expectation in Shanahan's system. But Jimmy G has, she's shown an ability to perform at an elite level, and expecting Brock Purdy to be able to slide into this spot on the fly with relatively little reps throughout the entire season at this point, and be able to kind of hit the right notes and operate the offense at a high, at efficient level is just something that I can't get on board with. And I think the downgrade's meaningful. I think I'm looking at somewhere in the ballpark of a 15% downgrade in terms of win probability for this game, going from Jimmy G to Brock Purdy. Market moved from what would have been a money line of about -250 to -175. So that's about an 8% shift in implied win probability, just in terms of what the look ahead number was from this game and where we are now at 3.5. I see the 3.5s have gotten pretty pricey here. So for me, I'm going to get involved in money line just as a matter of Tom Brady versus Brock Purdy. We talked a lot about how it was a perfectly bad matchup for the Miami Dolphins last week against the Niners defense. I think this is a good matchup, or at least a fine matchup for the Buccaneers. Brady gets the ball out of his hands extremely quickly. And I think in general, you have a more physical set of wide receivers, and in general, an offensive scheme that's a little bit more difficult to just come out with a physical game plan and stop. So, blathering a lot here, but I think realistically, you're looking at a nice opportunity for the Bucs to continue trending in the correct direction, and just in general, the fact that Brady kind of is now engaged is good. I wasn't exactly sure who in the locker room at halftime in the Saints game was like going to really inspire the troops and get them to play hard, but Brady did it. And in particular, I think he himself elevated his own performance. He has stunk this year in a lot of regards, and he was precise and efficient, and just very focused and driven on those final moments. So give me some Bucs money line.
Yeah, let's do it. Like 2.52 comment in here saying the NFC kind of sucks, which means Brady's going to the Super Bowl again. Let's hope.
It does feel like
Let's hope so. I do feel like the fact their division, the way it's set up, he's had time to just get his head right after the divorce. So who knows? Brady could be going back to the Super Bowl.
You put the Bucs in any kind of AFC playoff matchup, and they're touchation dogs.
Yeah,
and somehow,
I'd bet the team that's the touchdown favorite.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And somehow, if the Bucs are in the Super Bowl, are any of us surprised?
No, well, no. The way it's set up,
If so, somebody mentioned the Randy said the Bucs not dead for NFC if they get the 3 seed. This is more and more possible than people realize now, right? Like San Fran could lose out. They could.
Sure.
It's a huge swing game this week.
This one's huge. Yeah.
And then if they get the 3 seed, the Vikings are going to be the 2 seed. So the chances of that being a second round matchup where like the Bucks can beat the Vikings, there's not much separating those two.
I go a step further. The Niners and Brock Purdy could be the 3 seed. They're surely going to win a playoff game, right? Brock Purdy's going to win his first playoff start. Sure. Yeah. But no, the Bucks could take care. If the Bucks beat the Cowboys in the 4-5, which is no small task. I mean, the Bucks are going to be they'll be meaningful dogs in that game. But if that's your 4-5 and the Bucks win, then they go to Minnesota.
Yeah. There's lots of opportunities where things could work out for the Bucks. Now they suck, so they have to overcome that. But there's a chance that they can. And like my lifetime, there's just like the amount of times I've doubted Brady at some point mid-season, and then it just ends up with him in the Super Bowl. I'm not doubting anymore.
Yeah. Bucks Eagles is a market that we are owed as bettors in the NFL this year. We need to see Bucks Eagles market because of what happened in the playoffs last year. That's going to be one of the most fascinating kind of betting markets we get all year. And if that's their divisional matchup and the Eagles are coming off a bye, that's going to be, and people are going to have to put their foot in the sand one way or the other on Hurts and his matchup against the Bucks. That's going to be great.
Yeah. I'm not gonna lie, this chat has completely blown up the chat. So maybe we should just need to spend an hour in the podcast just talking about playoff scenarios and matchups. Fascinating. I've got a lot more confident about the Bucks in the last 3 or 4 minutes, which is crazy. Suma, a game we were very close to covering was the Jets at the Bills, and you have a small lean here, Jets. So they are getting a 10-point head start, and you think that's slightly too big.
Yes, I'm struggling to get to 10 with this matchup. Was there any comment, Drew?
No, I'm laughing because people are saying the NFC has 2 good teams. Sad. Kind of true.
Okay, not wrong.
Sad. No, it's correct. It's wild. Weird year.
Yes. Jets Bills. I don't want to put too much stock into Mike White. I think that he played against 2 very bad defenses recently. But I also think that 10 is a little bit too much in this matchup. The Bills are dealing with some injuries. Matt Milano has not practiced twice. Now he's a very important player. Von Miller is out. Their secondary still has some injuries. And even though I don't think that Mike White is that special quarterback and he will look worse down the stretch, I still think that the Jets might only need to score in the 17-ish range here to get a push or maybe cover this game. That's something that I can absolutely see. Like I said, I think that the Jets can run the ball a little bit on the Bills. I think that Mike White can make a few plays against the Bills zone coverage. And on the other side, the Jets defense played Josh Allen very well in the first matchup. Josh Allen and the offense still not up to that elite standard play that they had earlier this year. Deion Dawkins probably 50-50 to play this week. I think that the Jets can control the line of scrimmage and force maybe Josh Allen into a few mistakes, which might just make this game within 7 or 10 points late in the game. I just think that 10 is a little bit too much. I'm around 9.5 here.
Okay, yeah, and I think there's been someone has released the Bills potentially as a play, so you could be getting a bigger price there soon. I think at the moment plus 10.5 is 1.9, so maybe that's the one to lock in for the moment. Rob, over to you on the Patriots Monday Night Football minus 1.5.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't really agree with this price. I think the Cardinals still going to have major issues on the offensive line going forwards. I mean, when you look at 4/5 of their starting O-line is on IR now at this point this year, and a lot of their advantage of having the bye week is mitigated by the Patriots coming in on extra rest, having played Thursday Night Football. I think the Patriots look worse than they are in market right now because they went up against the Bills. Very bad matchup for them. I don't see Arizona as that same type of matchup, especially, like I said, with the injuries on the O-line going forwards. On top of that, I think the Patriots do have a pretty sizable matchup in terms of coaching ability in this game, particularly at the head coaching position. Bill Belichick against Cliff Kingsbury. We've seen a long history of Cliff Kingsbury at every single football level, whether that's the NFL or college, with his team struggling down the stretch every single season. I don't think this is a team that's personally going to figure it out. And I do like the matchup with the Patriots front seven a lot against this O-line that's missing, Justin Pugh, DJ Humphries, Rodney Hudson. These are just not guys that you can replace with backups. So I think Kyler Murray will come under a lot of pressure in this game. I think the Patriots offense, when they're playing bad defenses, can actually look good, like they did against the Vikings on Thanksgiving, in good conditions as well. This will be indoors, obviously, in Arizona. So I don't agree with this price. I think the Patriots should be larger favorites. I like them on Monday Night Football.
Okay, Patriots -1.5. Yeah, well, before we move on to best bets, very quickly tell you the current Matchbook NFL offer that's proved quite popular. It's enter the bonus code Matchbook NFL. That's enter the bonus code Matchbook NFL. You may have seen it on the bottom screen earlier. And you can bet £30 and get £30 in free bets, a £10 each following week. So if you bet £30 this week, you're going to get a £10 free bet for weeks 15, 16, 17, all the way up for Christmas. So well, checking out for those in the UK and Ireland that don't have a Matchbook account and would like to try out the betting exchange. We've seen a lot of people betting on the NFL this year, which is brilliant. So we'll go to best bets. We'll start with you, Suma, on your best bet is Panthers at the Seahawks over 44. Currently 1.92.
Yes, I like the setup for both offenses with a total that is 44. In recent weeks, that Seahawks defense has really come down to earth. When you consider that the Raiders scored, I think, 34 points in regulation, the Rams with a backup quarterback with arguably the worst offensive line in football, with Van Jefferson as their wide receiver one, were able to score into the 20s, run the ball well, use play action well. And even that game against the Bucs, where they gave up 21 points and the Bucs had a red zone turnover on that trick play to Tom Brady, even that performance looks even worse right now in hindsight with the way that the Bucs played against the Browns and the Saints on Monday Night Football. I think that the Panthers with Sam Darnold got a little bit more alive. I think that the offensive line got better. I think they can run the ball. I think that the Seahawks will have a hard time covering DJ Moore. And yeah, I just think that the Panthers might be able to cross 20 points here. And on the other side, I'm still high on Geno Smith and this passing game. And I'm not so high on the Panthers, even though they have a few quality players, especially along their front seven. But the Seahawks have been pretty consistent with their passing offense. They only had one game that was really a dud game. They even were heating up against the Bucs in the second half. I think the Seahawks will be able to move the ball, especially through the air. Ken Walker will be out. I don't think that should have any impact on the line because Ken Walker is like the biggest boomer bust running back this year. Great rookie season, but I think he has the lowest success rate of any running back in the league right now. So it's basically either a tackle for a loss, basically, or a big run. So I'm not overly concerned there. I just think that both offenses are set up to score some points here, and therefore I like this at 44.
Okay, that's over 44.0, currently 1.92. Rob, you were nodding in agreement with a lot of Drew's points on the Bucs, which might have given away your best bet. And you do like Bucs +3 at the 49ers. I guess you're in a lot of agreement some of the points Drew made.
I am. I thought Drew made a very strong case. I think typically you have a game here with a total of 37 or 37 and a half. Getting the underdog with the points is appealing in that kind of situation. So I like the Bucs here. One thing that I think is particularly, Drew hit the nail on the head with the Brock Purdy stuff and the priors on him and so on and so forth. But I don't think the market has quite adjusted to how valuable Jimmy Garoppolo is for the 49ers. No. I think a lot of people rip him all the time. He does have a few backbreaking turnovers here and there, but he's very effective at running the Kyle Shanahan offense. And if you look at Kyle Shanahan's 49ers offenses with Jimmy G under center, with him, 2.35 points per drive. Without him, 1.66 points per drive. That is a very drastic drop-off. You look at the red zone touchdown rate with Jimmy Garoppolo, it's 59%. All other quarterbacks, 48%. So not only do they not move the ball as well, but when they actually get into the red zone, they don't convert those into touchdowns without Jimmy G there. This is, you're asking for the 49ers to win by 4 here to cover a bet with a very low total an extreme unknown at quarterback. And by the way, if you look at Todd Bowles, all time as a head coach or defensive coordinator, he's 11-4 against rookie quarterbacks. He's going to send a lot of pressure. That's going to be tough to navigate if you are Brock Purdy in this matchup. So I'm not high on the Bucs. I can't even remember the last time I bet the Bucs this year. I've probably faded them a ton, but now we are at a point where you're going to give me Tom Brady +3 against Brock Purdy. Sure. Like sign me. I know there's more to football than that, but sign me up.
Yeah.
Like,
sometimes it's simple, Rob, isn't it? Yeah. And look, on that Jimmy G thing, I guess a lot of people were saying for 49ers, what happens if Jimmy G gets injured? That's the big thing. And then he gets injured, people start going, hang on now. Maybe they can do it. Maybe any quarterback can do it. So, look, and I know Drew's made those points. He's fully in agreement. But his best bet is you'll be up against Adam Chernoff here, judging by the comments here, Drew, because he did release the Ravens. This is all based on the comments now. Could be wrong. Which means you're actually getting Steelers at -1.5. He's moved the market. So 1.92.
Yeah, I think there's some information circulating about TJ Watt's health that maybe kind of putting a little bit of cold water on the Steelers this week. That's fine. He hadn't been healthy all season, but that does not change the fact that the Ravens offense was Lamar Jackson.
Yeah, 100%.
I mean, that's kind of the end of the story. It's disrespectful the way that the Ravens have treated their most important player of this generation. And the weapons they put around him are they're 32nd best in the NFL, maybe 31st if you want to kind of hold them up against the Texans. But if you said swap 1-for-1 offensive line and weapons, Texans, Ravens, you're thinking about it. And so it's tough to see then how now Tyler Hundley comes in and picks up the pieces here and gets the Ravens going against the Steelers front seven that is still elite, front four in particular. You don't have to have all universe performance out of TJ Watt in this game because everybody else across that D-line is doing their job and they're doing it well. Cam Hayward, equally as important to the success of that D-line as TJ Watt in my mind. At least he was last year outside of the counting stats. So it's going to be still a very, very tough task here for the Ravens to get anything going in this game. It's going to be an ugly game. We're looking at like 44 degrees and rain and a little bit of wind in this one. This is going to be a pretty gross game. And I think Ravens are going to have a very tough time finding any consistency on offense on this one. And while there's a lot of things about Kenny Pickett that I never have really understood why he was drafted where he was, why the Steelers have put him in charge of the future of their franchise. He's looked capable the last handful of weeks in terms of being able to run what they're asking him to run. Matt Canada's offense was one of my least favorite heading into this season. It was absolutely, laughable up until the bye, but he's got new wrinkles and he's gotten better play out of Najee Harris in the way that has kind of given them a little bit of a spark of life across the, a little bit of a balanced offensive attack here. And I think the Ravens defense is just broadly overrated. They have good players. They're going to be able to smother bad offenses. And, anyone that doesn't have, in particular, weapons in the passing game with speed, much like they faced last week, they're not going to look good against the Ravens. But Steelers with Deontay Johnson and Pickens here, I think, are going to be able to get some space downfield. Even Freiermuth has a decent advantage here against the safeties. So I think Steelers are going to be just fine offensively. They get into the 20-point range and keep the Ravens in or around sub 17. So I'll lay the points with the Steelers.
Okay, Steelers -1.5, 1.92. We're done for week 14. Loving the chat. I think we've really built it up here now in terms of Tom Brady and all other playoff outcomes. And my thanks to Rob, my thanks to Drew, my thanks to Suma. Insights.matchbook.com for a full recap of all the guys' bets. And that'll be up around Friday afternoon. Until then, we will chat to you next week, same time, same place. Brady's going to the Super Bowl. Bye-bye.